NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg announced allies would boost high readiness forces to over 300,000. The numbers currently stand at 40,000. The announcement was made ahead of the NATO summit in Madrid later this week. For more on this story, we can bring in France 24's Dave Keating standing by in Brussels. Dave, good afternoon. How significant is this announcement from Jens Stoltenberg?
This is a pretty significant announcement. Just if you look at the numbers, this is a big increase in the number of troops that are in this readiness stance. We have seen troops surge over to NATO's eastern flank happening over the past several months, particularly with U.S. troops being moved into Europe. But the difference now is that they're going to move these troops into this readiness stance. And this comes as tensions are increasing around the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. This is a part of Russia that's separated from the rest of Russia. In between lies Lithuania, Latvia, and Belarus, and to the south is Poland. And this has always been a tricky thing since the dissolution of the USSR, because goods and people moving from the main part of Russia to Kaliningrad need to pass through EU territory. And Lithuania has started checking those trains and trucks that are going from main part of Russia to Kaliningrad because of the sanctions that are in place. They're checking to see if there are goods in those trucks, in those trains that are part of the EU sanctions, because the Commission says that yes, indeed, if they're entering EU territory, the sanctions are applying even if those goods are going on to Kaliningrad. Russia has reacted furiously to this and said it would retaliate, but hasn't specified how. So the timing of this is very much related toward that threat. And Stoltenberg was asked about this at the press conference he just held when he's previewing this big meeting of heads of state and government from NATO countries taking place in Madrid. He was asked about this Kaliningrad question and whether the troop movements are to send a signal, and he said, yes, it's to send a signal, but not a signal of provocation. It's to make sure that there's no misunderstanding here by Russia, that Russia understands that NATO will protect every inch of NATO territory, and if Russia were to retaliate in some military way to what they're calling a blockade of Kaliningrad, NATO would respond. Stoltenberg said the movement of troops is very much to make sure that Russia understands that, as he put it, in order to maintain peace.
And Dave, what's on the table at the summit in Madrid this week?
Yeah, this is a long pre-planned summit at which they were always going to develop this new strategy for NATO, this new vision of how NATO was going to work. And it's interesting, before the outbreak of the Ukraine war in previous years, the big focus was on, okay, NATO was set up to counter Russia, but now maybe we need to transform it into being more about countering terrorism. That was suggested by Donald Trump, for instance, in previous years. Now, obviously, the focus is very much on Russia. And the interesting thing is the existing strategy document, the strategic compass, that was already adopted back in 2010, was done with the participation of the Russian president, if you can believe it. And in that document, they called Russia a strategic partner. Well, Stoltenberg was asked about this at the press conference, and he said, yes, for sure, Russia is no longer a strategic partner. Russia is an adversary, and that is going to be reflected in this new document that they're going to approve at this Madrid summit. So in a way, the Madrid summit is almost refocusing on NATO's original intended purpose, which is to counter Russian aggression, even though in previous years there was a lot of questioning about whether that was still NATO's purpose. This will be a very, very big summit. There are also some non-NATO countries that will be there in attendance. The Prime Minister of Georgia will be there in Madrid. Stoltenberg said at his press conference that's in order to send a signal of solidarity to Georgia. Georgia, of course, is not in NATO, but it is to show that sense of solidarity with Georgia, even though there is no mutual defense promise of protection for Georgia.
Dave, thank you very much for that. Dave Keating reporting there for us from Brussels.